Hello, everyone. Welcome. Hope everyone's doing well today. All right, well, let's get started here. Thanks everyone for joining. Today, I'm Lucas Alvarez. I'm here with Sam, and together we're going to host August AIGA Atlanta Insider. We're both the in-house committee from the Atlanta chapter, and I currently work at G&A as a sustainability consultant, helping companies navigate their way to sustainability. Also here with Sam, who is our genius tech and helps with all the other stuff that we do for the insider. So she's in the background there. Today we have a great, there we go. Thank you, Sam. We have a great interview today with Sam Duncan-Watt. He has over 14 years of industry experience. He works to help companies and organizations to implement strategic campaigns with engagement and impact at its core, utilizing creative, innovative approaches that create products and platforms with a mission of transformation and base growth. He has won many awards for his work and has been helping Care re-envision its brand and marketing arm by leading a team of designers, content creators, strategists, social media experts, and storytellers to launch new innovative initiatives, campaigns designed for the public engagement, and a brand new refresh for the brand across 95 offices, impacting over 6,500 people across the organization. So really big impact. So before we dive into the conversation, as always, I'd like to thank our Atlanta AIGA in-house team here. We're small but mighty. If you work in in-house or if you have a vested interest in in-house and want to get involved, please feel free to reach out to me and we'll shoot that email here later. I'm the chair of the board and the best person to contact to learn more. So if you're interested, reach out to me and I'll help find a way for you to help us. And on that note, I'm going to hand it off to Amy. How are you doing, Amy?
I'm great. I'm excited to share the August Market Minute with everyone. Amy Mangan from Robert Half Marketing and Creative. And we have one bit of scoop for you from Atlanta. So Nike has announced that they are exploring potential office space here in Atlanta. And that would be for corporate, like a Southeast corporate headquarters. So kind of exciting, not a done deal yet, but we're going to cross our fingers that we get some Nike here. That'd be cool. Also, the rest of my slides are focusing around the 2021 Q3 demand for skilled talent. So this is a much greater report. It's a free resource for everyone. There's a lot of good stuff in here, and I am going to preemptively apologize for the crazy busy slides, but what are you going to do? It's good info that I got to share with you guys. So in the top right corner, you'll see the updated unemployment rate from June, which is down below 6% now. That is all industries, right? So when we're looking at creative and marketing, it's much lower. If you skip over to the left side with the top marketing and creative positions, these are the unemployment rates. So ad managers are below 0.5%. That's insane. Tech writers and copywriters are below 2%. Web developers. I want to point out about web developers. A lot of companies are actually coding digital designers, essentially, even if they're touching like HTML as a web developer. So that's what gets reported to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. So if you're a digital designer, you may actually be lumped in with that. So below 2%, it's pretty wild. And then we've also seen a big dip in the unemployment rate for the marketing specialists as well. And I see that reflected in all of the requests we're getting for marketing specialists to be hired through Robert Half right now. So in this survey, we asked our clients what their top 3 hiring challenges are right now. And so the number one response was just finding the right people with the right skill set. I think that goes without saying with these unemployment rates so low, it's not a huge surprise that it's been a challenge to find good talent. Additionally, companies are posting great jobs, but they're having a hard time getting people to actually apply to them, which is something we hear a lot when people call us. And then lastly is just being able to move quickly enough through the process in order to actually land the best talent. So many clients call us very frustrated because they've put out 2 or 3 offers and they're actually either accepted and later rescinded, or they're turned down simply because the company couldn't move fast enough and they'd already gotten something else. Also on the right, you'll see about half of marketing professionals say that they feel that their career stalled during the pandemic. And even more than that, say they plan to ask for a promotion and or a raise this year. And it's not in any of my slides, but it's recent research that we did specific to creative and marketing leaders who say 75% of them are planning to look for a new job in the next 12 months. So if you add all these numbers together, it's going to continue to be a lot of change and shift in our industry. On the next slide, there's a lot of great information just about hiring plans and strategies. So companies told us what they plan to do moving forward in the next second half of 2021. So many of them, more than half, are adding new permanent positions. Almost half are also planning to backfill any vacated roles or bringing back furloughed people. Realistically, the minute they call those furloughed people, they'll realize they already have taken other jobs and they're going to just be backfilling empty jobs. That's what's going to happen there. And only 2% of companies are still on a hiring freeze at this point. The top 5 industries that are hiring. Now, this doesn't mean that financial people necessarily are getting hired. It means companies in the financial industry. So it could be a designer, in an insurance company or something. So we've seen a lot of jobs coming out of the finance, insurance, and real estate industries. And I would say that's been reflected in our Atlanta market as well. Manufacturing has been very hot. And again, could be for creative and marketing roles. Technology, of course, construction has been hopping, and transportation and public utilities also have really rebounded very quickly as well. And then on the bottom part of this slide, what it's basically telling us is what companies told us they've had to shift or change since January of 2021 in terms of their hiring process. So almost half of these companies have completely shifted to a fully remote hiring, interview, and onboarding process. Many of them don't require people to come on site at all whatsoever, at least not for now. About 40% had started posting roles directly to diversity focused sites and online networks. I know we've done that at Robert Half. We've really, and many of our clients have put a big investment in trying to post their jobs in places that they weren't before to attract a more diverse range of talent. And then about 40% said that they're searching in a wider geographical net. So oftentimes now I will get jobs with companies that are in Atlanta, but they're willing to see talent from Raleigh, from Charlotte, and other Southeast cities because there would be very minimal need to be on site, but it could be a short trip. For about 40% are increasing or have increased the use of temporary or contract professionals. And again, it's not on this slide, but specific to creative and marketing, 75% of creative and marketing leaders say that they plan to, over the next 6 months, utilize freelance and contract help to plug holes. It's taking way longer to backfill roles. It's taking way longer to fill brand new roles that have been created. So that work is going somewhere, and you want to make sure that it's not rolling off onto the rest of your team or even onto yourself, because then that creates burnout and future retention issues, which furthers the issue. So lots of companies are leveraging freelance and contract to make sure that their execution level work still gets done, thus freeing up the team for real, truly conceptual work, and also to take the time to do the interviewing that's going to need to occur to fill the full-time roles. And then many companies have gotten smart and really shortened their hiring process. So they've been able to cut a few steps out. I think with video interviews, that's definitely helping. There's a lot less logistics and making sure everybody's available and everything. You can move through that process a lot quicker and thus hopefully get the best talent very quickly and get offers out fast. And lastly, we're still seeing a lot of fully remote jobs being advertised, not just here, but across the country. But I will say that the Atlanta market's really being tapped for virtual talent from the Northeast, as well as in the West Coast. We're seeing tons of companies posting jobs here that say based in Atlanta, 100% remote, no travel. So that's what's happening. There's a lot more to this report that would be interesting to anyone in any position, whether you are an individual contributor or in a leadership position, and it's a free resource. So if you'd like to contact me to set up some time to review the whole thing, go for it. My contact info is on the next page, or you can hit me up on LinkedIn Messenger, whatever's clever. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Lucas.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. I can definitely relate to some of those stats. I am a full-time remote working out of a New York-based office, so it's definitely happening, and it's There's a lot of talent out there right now and a lot of change in the job shift. So it's really great to hear and see those numbers, especially for creatives. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Simon Duncan-Watt. Please join us.
Hey.
Hey, Simon, how's it going?
Good, good.
Awesome. Well, we're really happy to have you here today. I enjoyed getting to know you, preparing for this webinar. Today's focus really is on working with what you're given to make something not only compelling, but heartfelt. So oftentimes client budgets are primarily dictated what the ultimate product can be, or what a team can actually create. So working with a nonprofit, budget is always at top of mind. However, that doesn't mean you have to sacrifice quality. So Simon is a master at working with budget to achieve something moving. If a project needs something, he'll find the best way to achieve it within the guidelines and be able to get there. But before we get into the process, tips and tricks, I would love, Simon, for you to give us a little bit of your background and tell us a little of your past and how you ended up at CARE.
Yeah, great. So I grew up in Sydney, Australia. My nickname for some people in Australia was Salmon, so it wasn't too hard to hear that. Yeah, I grew up with a great love of cinema. I loved films. I was obsessed as a teenager with that form of storytelling. So I went to film school. When I got out of school, I did a media arts production undergrad at UTS, and I had this sort of vision that I was going to be, Kubrick. But when I, got in there, I started to really develop this this passion for activism and advocacy, taking part in, a lot of activism happening on the campus, and really understanding more about what was happening around the world with climate change, and at home with refugee rights and land rights and stuff. And I sort of began to find this way to sort of mold my passion for storytelling and filmmaking with my passion for activism and advocacy, in terms of being able to tell the stories of the people who are at the leading in activism, and also the people who are being impacted by unfair governmental policies and sort of cultural institutions. So when I got out of school, I went to Denmark for COP15 because I wanted to tell the stories of the people who were there. And it was there that I met Simon Sheikh, who was the leader of this small activist organization in Australia called Get Up. But they were like a 500,000 member organization. So it was actually quite large, but the amount of people in the organization was very small. And I came on as sort of the creative director there, which meant that I was the designer, I was the videographer, I was the editor, I was the campaigner. I did everything. I didn't really have a team. But that really sort of it really helped sort of develop my scrappiness around creative strategies. What can I do with $200? And it was really an exciting, fun challenge to find ways to sort of utilize storytelling to create impact fast. So we did a lot of rapid response campaigning stuff. So something would happen in the news cycle at 7 a.m. and by 1 o'clock we were releasing a press release, but then we'd release a video with it and some sort of a campaign page, and there might be a stunt that went along with that. So it was a really fun, exciting sort of place to sort of develop my process around how to think quickly, strategically, and creatively around opportunities to create impact really, really fast. I did the election cycle there as well, which was great, which obviously required a lot of content. And at the time, this is late 2009 to 11, something like that. YouTube was really popular. Facebook was coming of age in terms of content sharing and stuff like that. So we're really sort of finding ways to engage new audiences at that time, utilizing these digital strategies that hadn't really been utilized for advocacy that much at that point. That's when I released the It's Time video, which is probably one of my most successful videos, which was an LGBT inspired equal marriage video. We released it on a Friday in response to us urging the local government, who was advocating at the time to win the election, to make sure that equal marriage was part of their policy. that they would actually like run the election on. The video got really, really fast, viewings and ratings started getting shared by like Madonna and Stephen Fry and Ellen and stuff. And it was really, really popular. It got 16 million views. And because of public pressure, media around that, actually politicians having to respond to the video, the party did actually change their party platform to include equal marriage in 2 weeks. And it was like, wow,
That's incredible.
this is content can do this. Yeah, it was really exciting. And so that to sort of going on a lot about it, but this led me to New York, and I started working for Purpose, which is a social good agency. And I had this real privilege and beautiful opportunity to work with incredible clients across like gun safety rights, by launching the Everytown for Gun Safety organization, and then working, on climate change stuff with the AIGA Foundation. I mean, it was a really wonderful experience, and that eventually led me to then working with the Syria campaign, where we launched the sort of the White Helmets Nobel Peace Prize campaign. So I mean, it's just a lot of fun, interesting places that took me all around the world. And eventually, like, I got to CARE, because CARE for me was just like this really amazing organization that was doing incredible work. Like it's in over 100 countries around the world, as you mentioned, has over 1,000 programs impacting like hundreds of millions of lives every year, to basically, defeat poverty and achieve social justice. But not a lot of people had actually heard of this organization. So I thought it was like this really wonderful opportunity to come in and help to sort of tell the stories of the people that CARE is impacting, tell the stories of women and girls who are being empowered through this work, and really shine a light on this organization. And so that's sort of what I've been doing for the last 4+ years now. That's
incredible. I mean, yeah, and 4 years of that, and then your previous experience, it just goes to show you, it doesn't take a giant group. If you activate the right tools, you can make anything kind of happen. I love the direction. It was forward thinking at the time, and that's a big focus now. A lot of social justice, obviously, and sustainability in general is a field that I'm in. So I totally relate, and it's empowering. So it's really awesome to hear that story. So yeah, I mean, right now, as you approach projects, how big is your team now? So now you're in CARE, from the smaller group to this, you still use the same mentality, but how big of a team do you have now?
So it varies. Right now, it's moderately sized. We have video editors, we have designers, we have photo editors with copywriters, but it's not a huge digital team. We're still scrappy.
Yeah.
We're still small. I actually don't mind being a little bit scrappy. I think it helps to creatively challenge you to think about how to use creative in more interesting, innovative ways. But yeah, I love my team. I have a really great relationship with my team. And I think that's really important to have that relationship and to foster that the spirit of creativity and the courage and bravery to do new things. Just makes working on a day-to-day basis really exciting and really fun.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, going back to the scrappy mentality and keeping it small, really lets you kind of touch a lot of different aspects of what you need to do, and really gives you some insight, I think, onto how those things are actually accomplished, so you can have even more productive conversations with other team members. I mean, from my perspective, we don't do video necessarily, but when you're doing like a website, the fact that I've worked in development helps me communicate that to them. And it wasn't my primary job, but I had to at some time. So taking on those extra roles really can give you a lot of skill sets that you need for leading a team. That's awesome. So, I mean, you kind of described your mindset and the scrappy approach to projects, but what do you kind of start off with? Like, what are some of the requirements when you set up a project so that you know what to achieve?
Yeah, I think, and I've really started to get better about this over the years, is that really good projects start off with a really good brief. And having that brief, having that solid foundation of like, these are the audiences we're trying to reach, these are the goals we're trying to set. This is the call to action. These are the insights. This is the background information that you really need. a brief that you and the client sign off on is basically your manifesto for the project. And if it's not solid, the whole project can crumble in numerous ways that, when I was just getting started out would happen a lot. So that's for me, the brief. The brief is the most important thing.
Yeah, I think on briefs, I think I'd like to talk a little bit even more about that, because I feel like it's one of those things that everybody says, I need a brief, and then like there's always a challenge to describe what that brief is. And I know there's definitely different briefs for different types of projects. I think I don't know, you can describe this maybe from your perspective too. I've ran into issues where if you try to templatize too much of a brief too, it's also not very effective because you're trying to fill in some blanks that aren't necessary. So figuring out how to boil those really key points down is a challenge. So like what are some of those key points and what do you use? I mean, is it a Word document? It doesn't have to be necessarily anything crazy, but like, what do you do with that?
Yeah, I mean, so yes, I have different briefs for different things. And, for instance, we have obviously a templatized brief that we've developed over time. It's a Word document. It's a tick the box thing. Some pieces of it, are required, some are not. But then for other projects so for instance, we do this Impact Awards, which is a tentpole moment every year, annually at CARE, that we developed after I got started. And it's this big event that we do, which has gone digital, obviously, in response to COVID, which has actually been surprisingly made it even more successful in a lot of ways in terms of the audience it's reaching, and also the ability to attract talent to come and speak at it. Means that the lower barrier of digital participation has meant we've been getting, incredible talent and speakers to come and speak for CARE. But we have a separate brief for that we've developed because we as the creative team kind of own that brief. And so it's got very specific questions that are more relevant to the event than, perhaps designing a website or a web page or something that we do as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So yeah, as you take on different types of projects, kind of curating those briefs is a key. It sounds obvious. It's just one of those things too, where you just don't want to stuff the brief with nonsense, or clean, as quick and as bulleted as you can get, really, I think helps achieve what you're trying to get at. So it makes sense. And then diversifying your briefs in general. On that and creating your brief, obviously you come up with what needs to be in the project and what you've known from past projects. How do you properly assess the client's needs? Is it based off of that, obviously, but then how else do you dive into their needs?
Yeah, so signing off on a briefing obviously incorporates multiple conversations with the interested invested parties. And that's really digging into holes in the brief that we see, particularly trying to drive consumer insights which will then impact the creative. So I think that's a huge part of it, is to bring the client along with you in that process. And that's also one of the reasons why it's so important to nail the brief with the client, because at the end of the day, once you deliver your sort of executed creative, if it meets the brief, then you can, when the client comes back to you and is dissatisfied with something or whatever, you always go, well, this was in the brief. This is what we had discussed. And, and then from that clean slate, you can go if you want us to change things, we can absolutely do, revisions and whatever, but, that will probably cost more money or take more time or whatever, just to level set. But if it doesn't meet the brief, then they have every right to say this doesn't work, So I think that's a really important, vital part of it, is to agree on the brief, agree on the deliverables, and then meet that at the end.
I really like that. I mean, the journey you're taking, you're doing it, it's for client work. I think that's something that often gets overlooked too, where, you get really excited about an execution type or what you want to do. And that vital step of conveying that to the client and taking them through the process of why it makes sense will allow you to have a leg to stand on, so that when you get to that product and you've spent the hours, you don't have to redo it. I've definitely been in that boat before in the past. I think as a young designer, that's something that we see a lot of. So we're in the business of communicating what we're doing to the client is part of that, not just the end result. So that's great, taking the client through that process. So
Totally agree. Yeah.
awesome. Yeah. So, now that we've got an idea of how you approach a project, you had the scrappy mindset that helped you develop your skills. One of the main skills that you use in almost all your work is storytelling. I mean, that travels across a bunch of media. It's not just multimedia campaigns like you work in, but video, websites, social media. One thing that you mentioned in our conversation was the importance of it, and what makes a difference between telling your audience about your cause is actually getting them to participate. So pushing it from just being a visual to taking part, call to action. That's where the storytelling really kicks in. And we know it's a key. So could you share a little bit about how you create a compelling story? I think that would be amazing.
Yeah, sure. So it's a difficult question, but I mean, when I think about it from, again, video, let's just start there. It's kind of the easiest storytelling device to talk about. And then I think about it sort of two ways in terms of like what's sort of our more narrative version versus more of a documentary versus more of a sort of animatic explainer. There's more, clearly, that's sort of like three approaches. I would say that with documentary, if you're thinking about how do we create a compelling story, and we have a subject that we're interested in, to communicate that story, I generally tend to think the compelling story is really about how good the interviewer is. I think everybody has a compelling story to tell.
Yeah.
Everybody's lives is full of challenges. Everyone's overcoming obstacles. Everyone, has moments of power and I think it's about the interviewer being able to find that story in a way that is authentic and honest, and also delivered in a way that fulfills the sort of needs of the call to action effectively. So I tend to think about, when I do an interview, I like to have a good relationship with the person who I am talking to. I have to make sure that they have a very good understanding of informed consent, which is like incredibly important, particularly for the work that CARE does, because we work in such sort of fragile situations and locations, where we want people to be protected and feel comfortable that nothing's going to happen. It's incredibly important in our work. So that's part of it, sort of like our communications policy. So informed consent, do no harm, those sort of things. But then in relation to the interview questions, is not going in and trying to get them to answer your story. So like leading questions aren't as interesting to me as having a frank conversation with somebody, and then they can deliver all the interesting parts of their life. And a lot of that has to do with asking the right questions, noticing in things that they're saying, like, oh, let's go down that tangent for a moment. I think that's sort of something that delivers a really compelling story, is the interview process. In terms of more sort of narrative pieces like the It's Time video, I think it's driven by really interesting consumer insights. I think that's what makes a piece of storytelling compelling. When I go to insights, I tend to think of the Old Spice commercials with the "Be the man you want your man to smell like," where Old Spice effectively had this this consumer driven insight that the people that were buying deodorant were sometimes the wives or the girlfriends of the men, and so they were deciding which deodorants to buy. And so Old Spice smartly decided to sell to the consumer, and that delivered this brilliant ad campaign that actually went incredibly viral, because it was driven by this really smart consumer insight with really great creative that was funny and engaging and friendly. And so I think that's like a really great example of like an insight driving creative. Mm-hmm. And at CARE, we've been doing a lot of that recently, particularly around sort of our pro-vaccine campaigns for COVID, both domestically and internationally, trying to understand vaccine hesitancy and some consumer insights that are going into that, to better understand how do we create compelling creative to move these people up the margin of pro-vaccine and into a space where they feel less hesitant about it. So that's some of the work we've been doing. But yeah, I think that's those sort of parts of consumer-driven insights are things that create really compelling content.
Yeah, consumer. So the two directives for those two types of videos, basically creating an authentic experience by just having a natural conversation and not leading the client makes a lot of sense because it brings out your natural person. And then those insights, obviously driving the bottom line and all those. I think I'd like to talk a little bit about those insights actually, because finding those can be tricky and there's a lot of ways to go about that. So I was wondering if you could give us a little insight into how you find insights.
Yeah, some of it's intuitive and testing,
Yeah.
right? So you might have an intuition around what's going to work. So for instance, with the It's Time Equal Marriage campaign, at the time, a lot of people were approaching creative from the perspective and campaigning from the perspective of making the issue of marriage equality a legal issue. So saying that people should be able to get married regardless if they're gay or straight, based on the fact that there are legal requirements that come with marriage. So for instance, you can visit your partner in a hospital and you can adopt children and stuff like that. So they're saying we need to have equal marriage so everyone can have these legal rights. But then obviously the opposition came back and said, well, just have, civil ceremonies then, and we can just make it a legal thing and you can have your own thing and then we'll have marriages over here. So it wasn't working. So instead, I and my team of very few came together with this insight of what if we just made it about, equal love, right? If the love is equal, then marriage should be equal. And that was our approach. And that seemed to really resonate with people, but it was an intuition, right? It was driven by, talking to people in the LGBT space. But there wasn't a lot of that. A lot of it, more of it was just like this great creative conversation over a coffee in the afternoon, thinking, how do we move the needle on this? What if we did this POV video about equal marriage, and equal love? And that kind of worked. So that was great. But then you also, like with this vaccine stuff, we've been doing some very minor sort of focus grouping and audience testing to understand, like, why people are hesitant with vaccines, and and testing that, with our creative to see sort of what resonates with people. So this kind of, intuition versus group testing versus just general research to understand the issue better, which can involve, like, for instance, if you get a client brief, just talking to the client, understanding the issue more, trying to find those insights that really drive the call to action and drive investment in the campaign.
That's awesome. Yeah, on that note, we're going to share in the chat the link to that Get Up video of equal marriage, which is a really fantastic video. So there it just populated. Thank you, Sam. Really great. Check that out after this. But you can kind of see what Simon's actually talking about through that video too. Yeah, I mean, the focus groups, that makes total sense. Having to figure out those insights come from those natural conversations. And it's, again, I think it's one of those kind of things like the brief, where you can look at anything you want online and you can say, oh, that looks cool. But if you're not getting the actual conversation from somebody, you end up replicating kind of the same things that are out there, and they don't make those same kind of impacts. So it's really valuable, really, really important stuff. More on the process too. I was wondering if we could talk about, I mean, is that the brainstorming process is kind of blended in there as well? Do you guys take it back to a whiteboard and put all that together and put that in a brief, or like, how do you bring it all together?
Yeah, I like to approach all of my creative projects from a blue sky perspective. So it's sort of taking the brief at its bare bones and then saying, what is every idea that we can think of for this, including bad ones? Because often from the bad ideas come great little nuggets. But yeah, and so I do an ideation session, which is basically, it's a whiteboard, go around the room, everybody contributes ideas, we put them all up on the board. And then in the end, we put 3 blue dots on the things that we like the most, elevate them, talk about what make them work. And then we go away, we come back, and then we continue to refine, grow, refine until we come to perhaps 3 concepts that we want to pitch to the client. And, some people say like, oh, I want one safety in there. I'm like, I really don't want one safe one in there ever. Nice. Usually the client will pick that one, and then everyone will be disappointed. So I like to push it by having 3 ideas that we're all excited about. and put that in front of the client and then see how we go from there. But yeah, that's the idea. And the people in those brainstorms, I think it's important to note that in terms of my process, and I think most people do this, but it's not just like the copywriter and the designer and the video person. Like it's a lot of people, a lot of different minds. It may be, programmatic people, it might be people from the field, it might be moms, or it's important to have a lot of different people in those settings. Usually people who don't get opportunities to contribute in these spaces are some of the people who have the most interesting, best, unexpected ideas. So I like to have like a really good, diverse mix of people in those ideation sessions to really, so everyone is contributing and part of that process. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another good key insight right there for sure. I think it goes back to diversity and perspective, being able to get something outside of your typical realm. I mean, as creative, everybody can get stuck, especially even if you're the most creative person. You need those good and bad ideas all to come out to find the best ones. So that makes total sense. So now that we've gotten that process and you've worked through an idea and the client picked one and they didn't pick a safe one, which is also amazing. I think that's another key insight to kind of always push the needle, because it's so easy to default, and you definitely want to show the client what they want, but you can't just if you just baseline it, they probably will ultimately select that one. So once you do find that really cool idea based off an insight and you go out and you do filming, we kind of talked a little about this. You got the scrappy mentality. You're able to pull it all together with a small team. You do it, you get home. What do you look at in post? Like, how do you address your post concerns after you've already gone out and taken the video and got the content?
Yeah, I mean, so going through a post-production process is always the most exciting part. For me, it's where you've worked so hard on the pre-production and the brief, and the shoot has been a nightmare. You've been up since 4 a.m. and you've shot for a week, and you're just like, I just want to get this thing in the edit. And you start laying in the edit and you start putting it together. And then, usually the first cut is terrible. It just usually is, because it doesn't turn out how you envisioned it. Maybe some technical issues. So that's where you start to really massage the edit. You start to find the story in there that it's sort of leading into. So, I feel like filmmaking is such a collaborative process. It's such an organic evolution of a process that, I think trying to be so diligent and so like Kubrick about it is not going to work generally unless you have billions and billions of dollars. Even then, they still make it up. They still Marvel will throw CGI in backgrounds until like the last day just to figure stuff out. But I do enjoy that process a lot. I think that's where you start to have these really great relationships with your editors and your video people to really start to have trust and build these edits together until you get to something that you are satisfied with and meets the brief. So again, like you may get into the edit and be like, oh, this isn't working exactly how I envisioned it to, but I found a way to make like, maybe the story didn't come out in the way that you expected, but it went in a more interesting area. As long as you're still able to hit that call to action in a way that makes people click and engages people, and it conveys the messages that you want it to convey, I think you're still succeeding.
Yeah.
So that's like a huge part of it. And one of the things that I will often find is when making like content, whether it's infographic or websites or video content, I will often find people on the client side, and I totally understand it, wanting to include more and more information, right? It's like, it needs to convey this piece. It needs to have this person in it, blah, 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 blah. And it's really, that's the part where you tend to go like, they need to get to the end of this video. So they take the action. And if you keep putting barriers in front of them to the call to action, then they're never going to take action. So like, for instance, explainer videos and infographics and stuff like that. It's like, just put your key insights that make people click. So I think that's like part of client trust, working with them through like the edit and saying, trust us with this. This is a really great engaging story. If you add all these slides and large pieces of information, it's going to stop people watching or getting invested in what's happening on screen. So yeah, I think that would be, I hope that sort of answers the question. I guess that was a sort of roundabout way.
It does. I mean, what you're basically, I think, just to recap, I think you're describing this idea. It goes back to the scrappy mentality, and you have a brief with key insights, and you have what you want to achieve, but you're not writing specifically pages of exactly how every scene has to go. You're going in there,
Right.
yeah, with that idea, and you let the idea kind of evolve. So you don't restrict yourself on that nature either, which I think is a really key insight as well, because that's what allows you, I think, me particularly, when I have a project too, and I have a vision for it and I don't have all the details, once I start getting into it, I start working through those kinks, and it presents new cool things out of that. And that's part of the storytelling, finding what is making sense as you progress.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think particularly with production, it's like people sort of sometimes describe production as just endlessly problem solving. So like I've been to shoots where it's like you show up and it started to snow, and sometimes people are like, what do we do about this? And it's like, incorporate it, it's amazing. What a treat. So yeah, it's always about sort of going with the flow a bit rather than resisting it.
That's awesome. One more kind of aspect on storytelling. I'm wondering if you could describe and tell us about a successful project where you kind of had to push yourself with a lot of these challenges. As an overview, if you could give us a project example, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I shot a video for UNICEF where we were trying to portray the scale of the refugee crisis in Syria, called Empty Manhattan. And basically the concept was, we open with shots of New York City completely empty of people. Like there's nobody there. There's empty subway cars, empty Times Square, empty streets, you get it. And then we reveal that if, we say if everyone in New York City disappeared overnight, people would notice. And then we sort of said, I don't remember the exact number, but it's like 3.3 million people, Syrians, have been forced from their homes, notice them. And so that was the concept. Then there was challenge of having to empty Manhattan.
Not last year, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, in COVID times, that would have been relatively easy. But also probably wouldn't have been as compelling because we were like, well, that's just COVID.
Yeah, exactly.
But so 5 years ago, or whenever it is, 6 years ago, we just had to figure it out. So we basically just got a crew in a van driving around Manhattan at 3 a.m. to 8 a.m., finding empty streets, finding empty subways, just like literally searching wherever we could to find places that we could shoot that had nobody in it. And then occasionally there was some shots with some people in it that we just had to edit them out in post, which was really hard.
Yeah.
But we figured out scrappy ways to do that. And then we put all of our time and energy into like a hero shot of empty Times Square, because we knew that was the one that people go like, okay, that's really interesting. I've never seen that. So that's the one that we like put some actual like effects into, and actually like I brought in somebody to help me do that. And, so it was like, here's how we invest the money in this for the hero shot, and the rest will kind of work with it. So that was kind of like a really fun, scrappy project that we made for very little money, but again, was like super successful. It was, it was UNICEF's like biggest video at the time. So it was just like really cool to have this interesting insight of like, 3.3 million, refugees at the time who had been forced out of Syria is actually equivalent to Manhattan. So maybe we can do something with that. Yeah.
That's really great. I mean, that goes to show too, all that effort in the beginning, getting that concept, you'll find a way to achieve it if you get to the concept. So, I mean, that's such a challenge. Emptying New York, that's really hard to even conceptualize how you would do that. But just getting out there, finding the way that you did, that's what you kind of have to do to achieve the goal there. So that's awesome. All right, we're coming close to the end here. So I'm going to, in the final set, I want to talk even more about the mindset in general, because I think that there's a lot there. we aren't always given what we need up front too. So being able to think quickly on your feet allow you to adjust what you need. So let's talk a little bit about how you adjust, so what are some of those common hurdles that you might run into? I know there's a ton of different projects, so we can stick on video or a documentary series or just video in general.
So common hurdles that we have to overcome. Common hurdles are budgetary restraints, going into places where we are unaware of like the people that we're going to be shooting. So often we'll be traveling to different countries to capture stories. When I went to shoot the White Helmets in Turkey, part of the issue with that was to do it without alerting the Turkish authorities that we were doing it, because people were sneaking in from Syria for training. And so that was like under the cloak of night, and then also sneaking in like red cameras and being like, we're just shooting footage of your lovely city for ourselves.
Yep, that's a challenge.
Yeah, but then we didn't know who we would be talking to. And so again, that was just like, we just set up an interview space and set up this camera, I talked to the DP about how we wanted to sort of shoot this in a compelling way. And we developed this like strategy of sort of zooming in and out so we could sort of mix up the shot so it wasn't all flat, and having them look directly at the camera as opposed to me, because I actually really like that as an interview format, is having people look into the camera, because I think it develops more of a emotional connection with the audience. Yeah. It's more like you're talking to the audience versus somebody off camera. I stole that one from Fog of War many years ago. But again, that's where it's the most interesting, exciting, is literally meeting these people I would never in the world talk to, these heroes from Syria, and learning about the incredible heroism and stories and the work that they do, and then being able to take that to the world. It's just like so cool. And particularly, with Syria, all the media representation at the time was just so negative. It's just, it's just like Syria was being bombed, people were dying, civil war was breaking out, refugees, crisis. It was just awful. And so to be able to say, well, there's also this group of rescue workers called the White Helmets who literally go into the rubble and they rescue people, and they are the sign of hope, and people and kids look up to them in the streets and think, I want to be a White Helmet one day. It was just such a beautiful idea. And so really just trying to elevate that story, it was really exciting. And through video and then, inventive campaigning through like the Nobel Peace Prize campaign that we developed, up to the sort of Netflix movie that won the Academy Awards. So yeah, it's just really, really exciting to see that story develop and slowly get traction.
Very cool. Yeah. Yeah, that's such incredible work. It's hard to even comment on that. Definitely recommend guys to go check out Simon's videos at the end of this. A lot of really great stuff. So I had a question from the audience member, Christian, and this is maybe a common hurdle potentially. When you're large amounts of experience of making your videos and stories revolve around social justice, do you ever feel a sense of creative burnout? And if so, how do you combat that?
Sorry, I had a little bit of a sound issue there. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, no problem. Basically, also, because of your background experience and revolving around social justice, do you ever feel a sense of creative burnout? And if so, how do you combat that? Primarily, he says, early in your career when you were working as an individual.
Yeah, it's a big issue. And I actually had burnout earlier this year. I had to take like 2 weeks to just for myself to recuperate. I think COVID's doing that to everyone right now. Yeah. But sure. It's really hard, particularly working in social justice, because it feels like you move the needle and then somebody comes and rips the needle off. Like with climate change, it just keeps getting worse. We see escalating poverty, escalating racial injustice, escalating economic inequality. We see unemployment. It can just be, particularly working in that field where you live that every day, and it feels like the emergencies just keep coming and coming and coming. And I get the situation reps every morning from, what's happening in Bangladesh or Ethiopia, Nigeria, South Sudan. It's a lot. And then to take that and go like, what's a creative idea can just be, you know, really hard.
Yeah.
But I think that's just sort of to go like, oh, you know what, actually the work we're doing is making an impact. It's helping people. If it helps one person, then it's worth it.
Mhm.
You know, so and to feel the joy of being able to put together a story of in a way that really treats the subject with dignity and empowers them and really celebrates the work that they're doing. You know, it's just really, that's the inspiration that I draw from it that gives me the courage to continue to do this work every day. I said the word courage, it's probably not the right word. I don't need courage to do this. I'm super privileged to do this. I guess it's the joy, you know, inside to feel like I'm celebrating these stories. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, it's a weird middle point where you're in. You're like right in between doing great work to highlight these amazing things while also having to recognize all the craziness around it. So that's probably a constant struggle.
Yeah.
Totally. Okay, I had another question. Actually, you mentioned Bangladesh. Laura mentioned on the chat. Have you done any work for, forgive me if I say this wrong, Rohingya refugees?
Yeah, we do work with Rohingya and Bangladesh. In fact, we work in their refugee camps where we deliver sanitation services through our WASH programs to stop and battle the spread of COVID. We also have done storytelling there, elevating the stories of refugees there. So yeah, we do an enormous amount of work in Bangladesh, life-saving work every day. And I personally have never been to the refugee camps there, but that's part of our work as well. And part of my work is to sort of employ storytellers and train storytellers in these locations so that people can tell their own stories. In a lot of ways, we would like to sort of help to decolonize storytelling, so we can empower people who live in country to tell their own stories, and you know, and program participants as well to tell their own stories. So that's part of the work we're doing, and some of the work that we definitely have been doing in Bangladesh right here itself.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, we're coming up close to the end here, so I'm going to ask one more question on the mind state. And I'm wondering, so what are some of the ways that you push yourself out of the budget creatively if you have restrictions? How can you use that scrappy mentality to push yourself further?
Yeah, I like restrictions. I like to start, again, I start all projects from a blue sky place and then figure out how can we pull this off.
Yeah.
And you know, so for instance, with the It's Time video, like the production value and it feels really quite good considering it cost nothing to make, and it was done with like one DP who had a DSLR, one actor, me, and a producer in a van getting food and just driving around Sydney and just like jumping on roller coasters and, you know, just doing fun things. So, I mean, that was just using mates and saying like, oh, you're having a Sunday barbecue? Well, can we just show up and shoot something? You know, so really taking something that should have been a high production thing and just finding fun, creative ways to make it work. You know, I think that scrappy mentality just, it brings a lot of, it requires a lot of passion and belief in your project, which makes your project stronger, right? So like if somebody gives me $100,000 to make something, maybe I'll just, I don't know, maybe I won't feel as compelled to challenge people on the creative, right? Because I'm like, you've given me this much money. I feel like I owe it to you to deliver exactly what you want. Versus somebody's like, honestly, I got $5,000 or $1,000, but this is a really important issue. Do you think you can figure something out? And I'm like, I have an amazing idea if you believe in me enough.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Like, and it may not work, but this is like a really cool idea. And maybe they wouldn't take $100,000 punt on it, but maybe they take a $5,000 or $1,000 punt on it. And that's where that fun, scrappy, creative, like we're gonna try something here. And that's, I think, where really great ideas come from.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great insight. I mean, that's another thing too. I think maybe you could share a little bit on that, is that when you're given a restriction like that and there's only so much the client can offer, it to be able to take that as empowerment for yourself is something that I think creatives could use as well. You know, it's not, if you're not given the budget that you want, how can you use the budget to push your creativity? So you just like inverse that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And, and I've gotten really big budgets before, and I've produced creative, innovative work, and I enjoy that process. But I also enjoy the scrappy stuff too. I think it's just really, it's an opportunity for real innovation there, because you don't want to try and produce $100,000 thing with $5,000. You just don't. It's not gonna. It's not a great idea. But you can produce something really different and interesting with that, and see if it works. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been really fantastic. Let me see. Let's see. No, I'll just ask, I think to close it all out, I'd just like to ask a fun question, if you don't mind. It's been really insightful, everything you've talked to us about today. And I just want to know, like, where is the coolest place that you've traveled to through work? And you've been a lot of places, and then maybe you don't have to put a number one to it, but.
The coolest place. I mean, I really, yeah, I mean, it's hard because I mean, I love all the places I travel to, but usually the places that I travel to that mean the most to me are the people that I meet there. And the stories that I learned. So for me, it was going to Turkey and talking to the White Helmets. It was really just super powerful. Like, I loved going to Cambodia as well, and talking to garment workers there and learning about their stories. There's been wonderful experiences in, South Africa and, Thailand. But I think something about that experience with Syria, and really getting underneath the humanity of the issue. Yeah. Being able to talk to Syrians who are living it, and then that night they drive back, under the cloak of darkness over the border, and I'm just like, I can't believe you guys. You're amazing. Yeah. So yeah.
That's inspiring for sure. Well, wow, that's incredible stories. Thank you so much, Simon. And before we exit, I also would like to say Simon is hiring. So we'll put a link in here in the chat. There it is. If you're interested in a senior designer role, Simon would be a fantastic person to work for. So I really appreciate you, Simon, taking the time out today and talking us about your process and your mentality.
Thank you, Lucas, and thanks everyone for joining. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. All right, guys, we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.